So Blaine, I don't know if you know this or not, but when I was in Orlando, Florida, I was getting off the road. I knew I wanted to be a worship pastor, and our friend Neil Kennedy had asked me to come down to Celebration, Florida, to help start a church with him down there. He was leaving church on the move and coming down there to start a church. He's like, "Hey, I know you want to get off the road. Will you come down here and be my worship pastor?" And I'm like, "I mean, that's what I want to do. I've never done that before, but let's go." Nobody told me how hard a church plant was going to be. Uh, I just, I wasn't prepared for that. But he helped me to set up my ministerial licensing. And I did all the paperwork. I listened to all the cassettes, all that kind of stuff. And when I got my ministerial license, your name was the name that was signed, Blaine Bartel. That was like, oh man, I know who this guy is. Like I remember Fire by Night. I know all about what's going on at 180. And I'm like, that's really cool that now Blaine Bartel's name is on my pastoral license card that I carried in my back pocket in my
Wow.
wallet. So that's how far back we go. And I know, man, you've got a story, you've got a place in the history of Christian music, and you're a friend. I mean, you and I got to work together a little bit, get to do a little life together, back in the day, and I get to see you around Tulsa every now and then, and give you a hug. And so, man, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on the One Degree of Andy podcast, my good friend Blaine Bartel. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, it's great to be here, Andy. Yeah, I didn't know that I was actually responsible for you being in the ministry. So
Yeah,
thank you for that little signature.
yeah,
Oh, it's
yeah,
great. Well, you know how much I love you guys and your family and all that you do with Church on the Move being our home and just being able to worship with you when you're able to be there on Sundays is amazing. And yeah, it's a blessing to be on your podcast and looking forward to talking about some Christian music and a little bit
yeah,
about too. So
yeah. So Fire by Night, I mean, that comes up a lot when I'm talking to artists on this show. And then, of course, I had Stephen Yake on,
right, right.
several episodes back. And, there's a big connection there with him kind of helping get that started. So let's just dive into that real quick. Where did Fire by Night come from? What was the idea behind, oh my gosh, are you serious? Look at that.
Yeah, I pulled it out, man. My Fire by Night jacket. So
Wow.
yeah, Fire by Night's a curious story. I guess I was about 20 living in Canada, and I had this dream of doing a television program for young people and tried to launch it in Canada several different ways. We actually got on cable access, was seen by about 100 people probably. Uh, Long story short, we met Willie George, and who now pastors or was the pastor of Church on the Move before his son took it over. So we met Willie. He was doing children's ministry. We were doing student ministry. He started this show called Gospel Bill for kids, a
Right.
TV show that went around the country. And so we said, hey, let's do something for teenagers. And Blaine, what do you have in your heart? So we, along with just a great crew of people, including Steve Yake and some other guys, we put together this program that was kind of like the gospel, the gospel alternative to Saturday Night Live. So,
Yeah, yeah.
it had sketches and had kind of a sitcom, and of course, it had to have some great Christian music. So we launched our very first one, I think, in 1986, September. Our first guest was none other than the Carmen.
Yeah,
And
because he's a Tulsa guy. Was he
yeah,
living in Tulsa at the time?
was in Tulsa, and that's why
Okay.
we had him. It was very inexpensive to have him drive over and do the show. And it originally, Andy, just started as a video. So we sent out 300 of these videotapes with this 1 hour program to parents and churches. They began to show it to their kids and their youth groups. And then it just turned into this thing where it just started to grow. Eventually, we are sending, I think, 5,000 copies of the video or beta to
Hmm.
churches and homes. And then, of course, all the Christian networks picked it up. TBN picked it up. The military armed network
Oh,
picked.
wow.
So it just exploded.
Yeah.
And not because of any great acting or necessarily any great preaching or teaching on my part. It was just kind of the only thing. It was like the only really thing that I think teenagers had, at least in that time, that was a little bit entertaining, that kind of spoke their language. And then it had all this great Christian music.
You just don't put a show together, though. I mean, a TV show. I mean, there's got to be some background for you beyond being a youth pastor that was theater involved in early on for you? What was like
Yeah.
what was like how did all these ideas come together where you were actually able to say, yeah, I think I can do it. I think I can put a TV show together because that you just don't think that and then it happens. There has to be some sort of building blocks there in place, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I was in theater in high school. I've always loved acting and I've always loved production. And I'm a creative soul. I've always liked to tell a story, whether it's, my story or a gospel story in a meaningful way with pictures and with metaphors. And so we just, and then this guy that really well, Steve Yake. Steve, was just a young guy, a creative force, loved the music world and loved the creative world. And so I think we just began to put our heads and hearts together and we said, you know what, we can do this, And I remember, Andy, we would do about three kind of Saturday Night Live type sketches in every show, a 60-minute program. And we were fortunate that we could just go around our ministry office. We had probably about 50 employees. And we were fortunate that we had two or three or four guys and ladies in that office that had really good acting experience, that had either done it for a living at some point or grown up doing it. So we just picked them off out of their telemarketing job or their shipping department job or whatever they were doing. Say, hey, come on back here, memorize these lines. We're going to go shoot a sketch.
And were you
So
writing everything?
yeah, we had a great writing team: John and Vicky Joe Whitty, Steve Yake,
Yeah.
myself, and a guy named Chris Tice. And we would basically the first week of every month was writing. So we'd write the whole show, beginning to end, the messaging, the sketches, the sitcom. And the second week and the third week, we'd shoot it. So we'd shoot the sketches, the sitcom, and then the interview, and sometimes some music video with the Christian music artist. And then the last week was editing, and we'd edit that sucker together and get it out the door, and then start all over again. So.
Wow. Wow. How many episodes did you end up doing of the show?
I think we ended up like at about 84. It
Oh,
was
wow.
6 or 7 straight years, one a month. And they're still out there somewhere. There's a guy actually on, he's a friend of mine on Facebook that has actually taken every single videotape and put it on YouTube. So the entire collection of Fire by Night is now on YouTube if you're interested.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
I think I will go back and watch a lot of that stuff. I've seen bits and pieces, just through the years. And of course, working at Church on the Move, Fire by Night was always in the kind of in the legacy conversation of what Church on the Move was all about, along with Gospel Bill and Bill
right.
Gunther and all of the things that Willie George and that whole team created over the years. And Fire by Night was definitely one of those that were, just kind of a legendary building block for who Church on the Move was. Oh, and especially the music. I remember I believe For Him was on Fire by Night at one
Yeah.
point. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember being there. I remember being there. I remember being interviewed and I feel like Carmen was there
Yeah.
when we were there. Maybe he dropped by or something. Carmen always seemed to be around.
Yeah.
That was one of those guys that
He was.
I remember doing a show in Ponca City one time in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And we came back during intermission and walked back and Carmen's just sitting in our dressing room eating our catering. He's like, "Hey boys, what's going on?" We're like, "What are you doing here?" Like, this guy always shows up. But um, I just remember that being like this was a destination. Like every artist at
Yep.
some point wanted to be on Fire by Night because it was the place. Like you said, it was a Saturday Night Live where that's where if you're a Christian artist, you get to go play live and you get to sit down and do the interview. It was something that was always on everybody's to-do list.
Yeah, and then, it gave them a lot of exposure, obviously. I mean, if
Yeah.
you send out 5,000 of those videos and you have, 25 kids in each youth group watch it, it obviously would have some impact there. But for us, it was just like, oh man, to have, and I feel like in the 80s and 90s, that was, I mean, yeah, late 60s, early 70s, there was some great, Jesus people music, but 80s and 90s was my jam. I loved the Christian music back then. So to have people, like you guys and Petra and Carmen and DC Talk and the Newsboys, and it was just incredible. It was the highlight of every month for us when the artists would come in. We'd get to talk to them, and a lot of times we'd shoot a music video with them too. We'd
Yeah.
actually go out and light some barrels on fire and shoot some music video.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, I know that we did our Basics of Life music video in Tulsa
yeah,
with Steve. Yeah.
yeah.
And just, now living there for over almost 20 years now, I still drive by a couple of places, and go, oh, I remember leaning against a stop sign right there and pretending
Right.
like I was very emotional as I'm singing this lyric going, I'm the worst actor in the world. Um, can we run through you'd mentioned DC Talk and Newsboys and Petra. Who are some of the most memorable artists beyond those that you can remember having on during the day?
Yeah, there's three that come to mind that I really developed some friendships with. Uh, Rick Kua,
Oh yeah.
a whole album on suicide. It was called Don't Say Suicide. And
Hmm.
of course, that really spoke to a lot of youth in that day who were dealing with suicide and depression. There was an outbreak of suicides in Plano, Texas, where within about 6 months there were 6 or 7 kids that killed themselves.
Yeah, I remember that.
A national conversation. So when Rick came in and spoke to that issue, it was powerful, and we remained really good friends. Kenny Marks, who
Mm.
has passed recently.
Hmm.
Um, but Kenny became a really good friend, and Kenny was a deep thinker and loved to talk theology and loved to talk masculinity. I remember he was always passing books. He's Blaine, you got to read this, and we'd have some of these guys like Rick and Kenny. We'd have extended time with them because they would stay for a few days, do a music video. So we'd hang out. We'd go to dinner and have conversations. And then the last one, which shouldn't be any surprise to your audiences of Rich Mullins.
No.
So Rich came to I think Guatemala, and we did a fire by night on site in Guatemala, and we talked about missions and Rich came in and worked with us. He went out and did some mission work with us and recorded a couple songs there as well. But I really didn't know Rich when he showed up. I mean, I had no idea the kind of gift and talent and man that he was. Uh, and so he just kind of showed up and they put us together in a hotel room. So we roomed together for three
Oh
days.
wow.
This guy, oh my goodness, the heart and the passion and just I think the genuineness of Rich's heart and how much he loved people, how much he cared for the marginalized. Uh, yeah, that was a tough day when he passed.
Mm.
So and I I love Rich's music. That's just kind of my vibe. The kind
Yeah.
of little bit of worship, but then this really really beautiful lyrics, and they spoke to me deeply. So.
Mm. He's had a little bit of a comeback, his music has, over the last couple of years. I do think, one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot, just, not trying to pine for the old days of Christian music, but there was a depth and I don't know, a sense of wonder about what music could become and
Mhm.
what we could actually do with our gospel lyrics back in those days. And you'd really see everything's pretty safe now. on a different, safer plane. But guys like Rich were dangerous because they,
Yeah.
to the status quo because they asked questions and
Yeah.
they brought up injustice and they brought up, you know, the way that, the church can be very fickle in what they, and a
Mhm.
lot of times what they preach and then who they are. And so I do think that we do miss those voices now, like a Kenny Marks, like a Rich Mullins. I think that anytime that any of us can look back and remember those people fondly, I think is a gift, you
Yeah.
know, and realize that, that was a gift that God gave us during those times to be around some of those men and women.
It really was. I think of like I guess going back even further than the 80s. We were fortunate to have Randy Stonehill. So
Oh, wow.
Randy's like the Jesus movement guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
back with Larry Norman and some of those guys, Chuck Girard. So there's parts of that time when you talk about being raw and being real. Those guys, they didn't, especially when they started, they didn't have a lot of theology.
Yeah.
They kind of loved
Yeah.
Jesus, and just kind of would say whatever they
Yeah.
wanted to say. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think so many of us rode their coattails or stood on their shoulders because I just remember being 25 years old. I didn't know what I was saying through music. None of us had seminary degrees. Very few people in Christian music had seminary degrees. We had a gift and we had a platform to use it. And the labels threw us on buses and threw us out on tour. And thank God, most of us we still have our faith intact
right.
after all of that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, I think that Fire by Night is such a time capsule. I look forward. I would encourage our listeners to go to YouTube and start watching those because obviously it's gonna capture the character of the early 90s and speaking to the times we were living in, but also just seeing those artists again and hearing that music. Like sometimes I hear and some of the DC talk, early DC talk stuff, like the new thing stuff, and
Mhm.
just I'm taken back to those, when I was 24, 25, just on a tour bus going, man, I've never heard anything like this before. And to see everybody in that natural element of the early 90s is really super fun. I think everybody should go do that. Well, everything has its run, right? So uh, tell me about your exit from Fire by Night. I know you handed it off and then went on did some other things. So tell me about kind of the why it ended for you
Oh,
and
yeah.
where you went after that.
Um, yeah, before I do, I want to just share one of my favorite Christian music experiences. So uh, I got invited to speak at Creation Festival,
Oh, wow,
and I didn't know anything about Creation Festival. I just knew that it was like this Jesus Woodstock thing somewhere in Pennsylvania.
man.
Showed up
And it's
and
out in the middle of nowhere. If people don't remember
just a farm.
Creation, yeah,
Yeah.
it's 2 hours from any major airport. Yeah,
And there's like, I mean, 30 to 40,000 Christians there,
yeah.
mostly young people, 20s, and threw me up on the stage with all of them. I mean, as far as you can see, there are
So you're on
people.
at night.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, I think I only spoke for 20 minutes because they kept things moving, but it was one of the most thrilling, moments of my life to just speak to that many people, especially outdoors. But then I got to hang like the rest of the time at Creation, and of course they gave me access to backstage in the green rooms, or not green rooms, but kind of places where the
Yeah.
artists would congregate before they go on
Hmm.
stage.
Hmm.
And it was just so amazing to just meet these guys and see old friends. It was just kind of like a reunion, and I'm sure you were at several of these, but it
Yeah.
it is somewhat of a reunion. And it's
Yeah.
with your buddies and people you don't get to see, but maybe once or twice a year. So it
Yeah.
was
We used to call those class reunions because
yeah,
it was like these people you knew, but you'd lost touch with and maybe saw them, it's before Facebook and social media. So you couldn't really keep up with people in real time, but you would kind of hear about what they're doing. And And again, yeah, festivals were some of the sometimes the only times we'd ever see the Newsboys
Yeah.
or DC Talk or the award shows, the same kind of thing. But I mean, props to you, bro, that you got to speak when it was dark. We, I don't think we ever did a major festival, uh, just because that wasn't our brand of music. We never played at dark. It was always maybe at dusk, at
Right,
at
right,
worst, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon when it was 400 degrees and
right, right.
3,000 people out there. But there were some great times where we got to go on stage right before the headliner, or because back then the headliners would have been Newsboys, DC Talk, Michael W., Stephen Curtis.
Right.
Um, yeah, do you remember who was there that year you were there?
No idea.
It's all a whirlwind, huh?
I'm going to push back on that. I mean, for him was, I think, had a reputation of being every bit as strong in terms of carrying an audience as any of those other bands. I mean,
Well, I appreciate that.
I think you just spoke maybe to, I don't know. You know better than I do, but you just, maybe you didn't. I don't think your music spoke to teenagers as much as it spoke to young adults and adults.
Yeah. Yeah. People weren't going to crowd surf at our concerts
No,
or
no.
during
Yeah.
our set. Yeah. So it was the crowd surfing, you know, uh, yeah, again, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So let's talk about the end of Fire by Night and kind of what was it that made you decide, hey, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on to something else.
Yeah. I just remember, I think I'd outgrown it. And we I was playing a teenager in the sitcom, and
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I'm now in my 30s and I'm still 18 and a senior, and I thought I just outgrew it. So I just decided, I was ready for something new. And so I met with Willie George, who was like I said, our partner in this venture, and who basically owned all the studio and the equipment and all of that. And I just said, hey, I feel like my time is up, and I'm going to go to Colorado, and I feel like we're supposed to go launch a church there. So he said, good, yeah, I'll support you in that, and so they wanted to keep it going, and so they found a youth evangelist named Eastman Curtis.
Yep.
And I knew Eastman. I'd met him several times, and Willie George knew Eastman. So they brought him in and interviewed him, and he seemed like a great fit. So they actually kept the show going for a little bit longer. And Eastman kind of took it over. They kind of redid some things. They came up with a new sitcom. And then I moved to Colorado. We started a church, and it was like the hardest thing
Yeah.
I've ever done. I was like, after a couple of years, I was like, I'm ready to go back to Tulsa.
Yeah.
This is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was a good move for us. But yeah, you've been there where you just a certain season is over and you know
Uh-huh.
it's over and
Yeah.
it's time to take a new step.
Yeah. It's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to let go of what's familiar and go into the unfamiliar. And yeah. But when you do, you realize, man, that's the way life should be. You should, I can't tell you how many times I've read Necessary Endings,
Mm.
to just go, it's got a career arc and you got to know when to let go and not hang on too long. You never want to write anything all the way to the bottom. And then you and I met, like I said, you and I met wow, I know we'd met along the way, but really I moved to Tulsa in 2005.
Yeah.
And so you came back because of 180, correct?
Yeah. So we moved back in 1995 and kind of helped launch the beginnings of 180.
Hmm.
Uh, and by the time you got there, I can't remember if I had passed 180 off to my associate, Eric Lawson. But, anyways, 180 became a thing.
Yeah. And for people
And
who don't know what 180 is, it was I was at the forefront of youth ministry. It was one of the premier youth ministry models in America or in the world, really. I mean, nobody was really doing what Church on the Move was doing with youth at that time.
Yeah, it was exciting. I think the reason well, I don't think I know the reason it grew like it did was because our pastor, Willie, was very, very committed to it. Invested money. We ended up raising, I think, $5 or $6 million to build a youth facility.
Yeah.
And we were sending Andy, we were sending like 40 to 50 school buses out every Wednesday night to pick up kids all over the city as far as 30, 40 miles away
Wow.
and bringing them in, experiencing this really extraordinary youth space. It had, games and video games, a cafe, it had indoor cage basketball. And then we did these services. We did a junior high at 7 o'clock, and we had about 1,000 junior highs, and then we do a,
Wow.
a senior high service at 8 o'clock, and we'd have about 1,000 of them or more. And it just exploded. And Christian music was also a very, very big part of that as well. Uh, I remember we every year we do a huge "See You at the Pole" rally. And See at the Pole, for those who don't know, is just all, kids gather at their flagpole in September and they pray for their school, et cetera, et cetera. So we did an evening rally corresponding with that event at the Maybe Center. Uh, and this is our youth group. This is our church youth group. So we rented the Maybe Center. It seats 10,000, maybe 8,000 people. We brought in the Newsboys. And so they did a 30-minute concert. We did some drama, some sketches. I preached for 15 minutes and the place filled up. I mean, the
Hmm.
entire Maybe Center was full. There were like 1,500 kids that raised their hand to receive Jesus that night. So we even during that local student ministry time at 180, we really accessed all the music that was speaking to kids in that time. And by that time, it was like Jars of Clay. There were some of these new groups that were Delirious was
Yeah.
popular band.
Hmm.
We sang a lot of their worship songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great, great season, man.
Wow. Wow. And then, obviously you continued your journey through pastoring churches. And I know you planted another church in Dallas
Yep.
after I got there. And, and then, I have to talk about this. I have to bring this up because I know it's part of your story. I feel like Blaine, and this is gonna sound weird as I roll it out, but as much as you and I knew each other and did some ministry together in the early 2000s, I I felt like I grew closer to you after what you went through, and I read your book, Death by a Thousand Lies, and and then now knowing you now and having a relationship with you now, to me is deeper and sweeter than it ever has been. And I want to know if you'd like to share part of your story because I think it's really encouraging to anyone that's going through a difficult season in their life out there. I think it would be I think it'd be awesome if you'd share some of your story with us.
Sure, happy to. So kind of during all that time that we've just talked about, the Fire by Night days, the 180 days, so about 20 plus years of ministry, this slow burn of addiction began to simmer in my life. It was very secret, very covert. Nobody knew about it except me. And it started in a hotel room in 19, I think 88, 89. And for the first time in my entire life, I looked at pornography.
Hmm.
And I was at this time, I'm 28 years of age, never seen porn in my life. And I'm sitting in a hotel room. And when I think about why, I was just exhausted. Uh, I was alone. And for whatever reason, temptation in that moment was really easy to give into. So I remember just hitting one of those hotel red buttons on the white box, and on came all this imagery, and it was awful, and it's on some level enticing, both at the same time. I knew, uh, I knew in that moment, Andy, it was dangerous, and yet I knew how much my flesh uh, loved every moment. But I shut it off after 10 minutes. And I tell people the worst mistake I made that night was not turning on porn, but going down to the front desk and catching the attention of the clerk and paying for the movie so that my host would not know what I'd watched. Take it
Hmm.
off the bill. And I really didn't think I'd ever do it again. I mean, I came back up to my room. I said, God, please forgive me. I woke up the next morning, opened my Bible. I mean, I repented. I did everything I knew to do except tell somebody. And I just thought, I'm going to beat this. I'm not going to go back to this. And 6 months later, bang, again. And then 3 months, and then a month, until finally this just became a stronghold in my life. And everywhere I'd go, I'd turn that porn on. And then of course, internet became a thing, and it became so accessible and so easy. And the only reason I share the details of my story is because I felt like the Lord told me to, and I felt like the Lord said, if you'll be honest about your story, it'll help other men get honest. It'll help other men realize they're not alone in this. So I don't share any of these details in any way to look back and have any desire to go back, or have any desire to even talk about it. But I began to step outside of my marriage with escorts and prostitutes. I was going to massage parlors. I really didn't have any quote affair with anyone I really knew. It was always anonymous. It was always something that I found on the internet. But I was an addict. I couldn't stop. And I would say at least every week, I would look in the mirror and just want to kill myself, because I knew how hypocritical I felt. I knew how shameful I felt. I knew how awful I was. And somehow I was able to hide it all those years. Uh, and finally, by what I call God's terrifying grace, he disclosed and exposed it all in, let's see, 2006. No, 2009. So we were in Frisco, Texas. Uh, I met with somebody, again, that was anonymous on the internet. She recognized me.
Hmm.
She knew who I was.
Wow.
And it was just a random woman that was just looking to meet a guy. She wasn't in the sex worker trade or anything like that. And she just said, "Hey, I know who you are. And if you don't," of course, I was lying about my identity at that time, but she said, "If you don't go and disclose everything and tell your church and tell your family, I'll expose you. I'll go to the Dallas Morning News type thing." So she put me in a corner, and it was terrifying because I knew I was about to lose everything, and yet there was grace because God was about to save me from complete
Hmm.
destruction.
Hmm.
So I went through that process, Andy, of going home, first of all, confessing to my good friend Ron Luce, who was on our board. Ron, took me home. I confessed to my wife, to my kids, to my trustees of my church, resigned my church. It was awful. It was just an awful, awful time, not just for me, but more so for my family, for
Yeah.
my Kathy, for
How old
my,
were you? Old were you at this point?
so I was right at 50.
Wow.
So just imagine, like, yeah, living this charmed life for all these years. And even at that time, our church was exploding. We had
Yeah.
started that church. You'd come and helped
Yeah,
us.
I'd been there. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you'd come and helped us start it. You
Hmm.
did one of our opening services. So it had gone from, a few families to 1,000 people in 3 years. We built this building, and then bang, they get a resignation letter read to them on Easter Sunday of 2009. So it was awful, bro. And as a result of that, I mean, I lost everything. Kathy and I really worked hard to try to repair our marriage in that first year, and she just could not get past the hurt and the pain and the the imagery of everything I'd have done and every place I'd been. And so our marriage ended. I lost relationship with my three sons for several years where, they just didn't want anything to do with dad. And we financially devastated. So it was just an awful time. Obviously, I stepped away from church world, ministry world. I felt like I was completely disqualified, and
Mm.
so I just got a job and figured out how to make a living and did that for several years. And in that process, tried to figure out how to overcome this addiction, this stronghold that still existed
Yeah.
in, you know.
Yeah. Can I back up just for a minute? You said something at the beginning of this. You mentioned being tired and lonely in a hotel room. And, that is a struggle for anyone that travels. And again, just knowing so many Christian music artists and people that toured for a living, that, the worst things happen to you when you're tired and alone. You're away from your family. It's not that you go into these things wanting to make a mistake. You're not looking for this kind of stuff. It tends to find you in your weakest moments. And, I think that it is a very, and it's all sorts of stuff. It's not just pornography. I mean, it can be all sorts of vices that you let your guard down. And I think that's, again, I've talked to so many artists that, people that are friends of mine that, as they got deeper and deeper into the touring world, as they spent more and more time away from home, as the money got bigger and better, as the perks got bigger and better, that's when the worst things happened in their lives because, and honestly, for many of us, it was because we weren't connected to churches. You
Yeah.
know, the church wasn't a part of our lives. We were serving the Christian community, but we weren't a part of a church. And I think a lot of that was we see a lot of that changing now because and honestly over the last 20 years or so, because so many artists, I think it started with Casting Crowns, one of the first groups that I knew that carried pastors with them on the road.
Yeah.
That they were going to be they decided if they couldn't be at church, church was coming with them that and
Yeah.
everything that went with us. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to just to parallel that with again so many artists that I know and I've heard their stories that it was in a time of being very tired and being very lonely that they made the worst mistakes of their lives.
Yeah. That was it. I mean, when I look at the time that I gave into that first viewing of pornography, I've been on the road for 2 years, basically like maybe 45 weekends out of the year.
Hmm.
So you get home, you do more Fire by Night, more of our TV production. So you're busy with that all week, fly out Friday, do another weekend of conferences and church meetings and events. And I just didn't Sabbath, nor did I, even though I, quote, had a home church, I was never
Yeah.
there. And I had nobody really speaking into my soul. That wasn't a thing, like it was like in the 80s. It's changed today, but in the 80s, it just was never a thing to say, "Hey, how are you doing? How's your
Yeah.
soul? How
Right.
how's it
Right.
was
Yeah.
so there's a
And
lot
you
of
really didn't surround yourselves. One thing that I felt like was a gift to me was that I had people in my life that um, didn't have a stake in my success or my failure. They
yes,
just loved me and my family. And that was a real saving grace to me and to Jackie, just to have people around us. I didn't care if we were in the music industry or not. They just loved the Christman family and they wanted to be around us and be there for us and ask us those questions and and care for our souls rather than going, oh, we love your music. We love, can we get tickets to your concert? I mean, and those are I think that's what's tough about Nashville. It's one of the reasons I never wanted to really move to Nashville. And Nashville's not a bad place. I actually love it here. We're recording this episode while I'm here in Nashville, doing some work. But it just felt like, when I'm here, I'm working. And when I'm here, I'm in the industry. But when I can go home to Mobile or home to Orlando or home to Tulsa, then I'm Andy, the next door neighbor, or I'm Andy at church if I'm not on stage. And so, and I know a lot of pastors go through that. Pastors can't, they're not able to separate themselves from their ministry, especially if it's a very, uh, if it's a ministry that's doing really, really well, they can't separate themselves from that and just be normal, you know, whoever. It can't be normal Andy, can't be normal Blaine. And then that takes a toll. That's that weight that just weighs on you more and more and more and more. And I just, man, if you're out there listening to this and you feel like you can't talk to somebody, you can talk to somebody. There are always people. God will make sure there are people around that you can pour your heart out to and be honest with before it's too late. And
Yeah.
not to use you as a cautionary tale, but just to have the value now, as I know you do, to have men around you that you can walk with who don't have a stake in your success. You
Right.
know, they're not there just because you can do something for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really grateful today. God took me on a journey of, really finding out what it meant to take up my cross,
Mm,
deny myself, and follow Jesus. And that was a tough journey, to lose the ego and lose the pride,
mm,
and lose the selfishness, and lose the desire for, stagecraft and popularity and all the things. And God made sure that I went through a really good season of just him being everything, him being the only thing, really.
mm,
Uh, and dying to that man that I thought I was, that I really, really wasn't at all, and really finding what I call today like the resurrected person, the one that Jesus actually wanted to live through, and to begin to learn what it means to be conformed to the image of Christ, and what it means to serve, and what it means to love well. And I was fortunate that God gave me some wonderful counselors. I went to rehab in Phoenix, Arizona for a month. Put some amazing pastors in my life that walked very, very closely with me. And there was a season of up and downs for about a year and 3 months, but within about a year and a half or so, God completely set me free. And
mm,
it's 13 years now without a relapse in any of those areas. And today, I get to tell my story and get to share my story in hopes of being able to help other men. And so we're fortunate that we get to pass on the things that we've learned, the wisdom that I've gained, the tools that we've figured out in learning how to walk healthy in life to a lot of men and a lot of people in ministry too. So.
mm. I got to tell you, I mentioned your book already, A Death by a Thousand Lies, and I got that in 2020. And I had just stepped off staff at Church on the Move, just felt like there was a new season for me. I felt like I'd run my journey as the senior worship pastor at Church on the Move after 15 years. But I also didn't know what was next. I didn't know, where do I go from here? I had some plans, I had some thoughts about what I wanted to do. Then of course the pandemic hit and we all had a lot of time to read and reflect and, you know, and pray maybe more than we had in the past because everything got quiet. But I read your book during that time. It may have been a little earlier than that. I'd taken a sabbatical, um, a little before that. And there was a part of your book that that struck me the most, that has stayed with me to this day, is you talked about Ron Luce, kind of being one of the main guys that walked you through all of this. And I'm not going to quote it exactly. If I get it wrong, please correct me. But I remember there was a part of your journey where I believe it was Ron who told you, "Hey, before you pray, before you open your Bible, before you do anything in the day, sit down on the couch and say, 'Jesus, I invite you to sit with me and talk to me.'" And that was, man, it sounds so simple. And it sounds like, well, shouldn't we be doing this every day? We should invite Jesus into our personal space and let him talk to us. And I remember you saying it was one of the hardest parts of your journey at that point because we're all so addicted to information around us now. I don't even
Mm.
know. I remember 10 years ago them talking about the statistic of how many times we pick up our iPhones during a day. I can't imagine what it is now,
Yeah.
especially with social media exploding, that I can't imagine how many times we pick up our phones and look at it, but we're always our brains are addicted to information here, 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 when God is whispering, stop.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
stop. You mentioned Sabbath and how important Sabbath is in our lives, and that's a whole other conversation. And we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast. But being able to just to stop and say, God, what do you want? What do you want to tell me? And I just want to tell you, and I may have told you this before, but I just want to thank you for that. Not only sharing your story and walking us through what God did in your life, but also to drop a nugget like that I think was for me in that moment where I'm like, I think I want to try and make this part of my day. And
Mm.
I'm not always great at it. I can't tell you I do it every day, 7 days a week, but the times that I stop and go, Jesus, what do you want to talk to me about? I'm just going to
Yes.
stop. I'm going to turn everything off. I'm not going to put headphones in. I'm not
Yeah.
going to put myself in a position where people can get me to do something for them. What do you want to say to me? And I will tell you that getting into that habit after reading your book and you mentioning that has been one of the most life-changing things for me. Just to go, I don't have it all figured out. I can't figure it all out. And Jesus, I need you to talk to me. I need you to I just sometimes, and you may have said this in the book too, I just need you to put your arm around me
Yes.
and
Yes.
remind me that you're with me.
Yes.
And that can do more than reading the Bible through 5 times.
Mhm.
It's just knowing and being convinced that Jesus is literally sitting beside you with his arm around you.
Yeah, I think one of the prayers that I've begun to pray on if not a daily basis, every few days, is they call it a Jesuit prayer. And it's a prayer where you just say, Jesus, where have I moved closer to you today? And then you pray, Jesus, where have I moved further away from you?
Yeah,
Just to sit with that. And different things will come to you and you'll like, yeah, I was a little bit got a little bit angry in traffic that I wasn't moving closer there. I was moving further away. So um, I think I've learned to not just find Sabbath in terms of the seventh day or the first day, but to find daily Sabbath, find daily margins and rest to not get caught up in everything because at the end of the day, I think the reason that whether it's pornography or abuse of alcohol or abuse of a drug of some kind, all the different, like you said, the vices that are out there, ultimately, we're not engaging in these things to be awful people. We're medicating something.
right, right.
There's something going on the inside that needs attention, and it might be anxiety, fear, rejection, failure, or just busyness, and you feel entitled to a break. But we have to pay attention. And so I love that you brought that up, Andy.
Yeah. Tell us where you are now. Like, tell us where your ministry
Yeah.
is now and what you're doing.
Well, I'll give you a quick little nutshell. So I'm doing two things. Primarily, my wife Lori and I have a place just a few minutes outside of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. It's called House of Resurrection, and it's a residential healing center where we bring marriages, men, ministers in for healing out of sexual brokenness. So whether it's pornography addiction or infidelity or whatever that may look like. We're doing that full time and just helping people find freedom. And we've developed a whole Catheros freedom model. In fact, we teach that model at Church on the Move twice a year with about 40 to 50 guys. It's about an 8-week model that we take guys through. So we're doing that full time. I speak a little bit. I kind of limit my speaking to about once a month, but I do enjoy that. I do enjoy meeting pastors and getting out there and helping men do things. And then the second part is because that is all crisis oriented. Trust me,
Yeah.
everything in that part of the world is a crisis. And so I've got this other kind of fun part of my life. And I've got a buddy that his name's Joel Hornstein, and
Oh, yeah.
we started this thing called the launch department, and we both have this passion to help other people launch their big idea, their dream, their church, their book project, their whatever it may be. So we've developed what we call the launch sequence, and we walk people through what that looks like. So that's the fun part of my work, getting to work with Joel and work with entrepreneurs or what we call closet innovators that have these ideas but don't know how to get them out. And then I come back to the tough work and do the crisis work as well.
I
So
wonder if that kind of keeps you, I mean, it sounds like it keeps you really balanced to,
yes.
because look, I mean, here's the thing. Here's what I believe. If God gifted you with a creative spirit and just really great muscles in creating content like you did for decades. I mean, you're a legend, bro. I mean, everybody knew about Blaine Bartel that was in ministry, that you were a creative. You're going to not shake your head at this, but a creative genius, someone who could take an idea that looked so formidable and bring it to excellence into where everybody wanted to be a part of it and copy it, to now not using that at all for an entire season of your life. I just personally believe that God doesn't, I don't know that God ever takes those gifts away. Maybe he just lets them die. That you talk about resurrection, there's a time to bury that stuff too, and allow it to come back into, or let it die, not bury it, but let it die. And then I think God brings that back in an even greater way. And I'm excited to hear about that because that spirit of creativity that you have is just, I think, a beautiful gift that God gave you early on, and I love seeing you use that at this stage of your life.
Yeah, I enjoy it, man. And I'm 64, so I don't want to launch anything else. I want to help someone else, do
Yeah,
something. So I got all these pent up ideas. I'm like, you go do it. We'll help you do it. So
yeah.
it's awesome, man. But yeah, I love my life today, and by God's grace, got a beautiful relationship with my sons again. God's restored that. Even my ex-wife, Kathy. God has brought all kinds of love and reconciliation and restoration in our relationship. So we do holidays together with our
Mm,
kids. So there's just such a beauty, I think, for anyone that is either, listening to this and you're in crisis, or man, you got some secrets and you feel like it's going to create crisis. If you get help, listen, God is in the restoration business. And we all have our things. We all have stuff we need to work on, and God will be faithful if you'll just give it to Him.